Welcome, dear friends. Another evening has come, and here we are again, gathering by the soft glow of the fire, ready to embark on a journey to distant lands and great events that have echoed through the centuries. Tonight I'm going to tell you about a man like no other, a name that shook Europe with his dreams, Napoleon Bonaparte. A leader who rose like a star, brought entire continents to their knees with his ambitions, and left his mark on history with his monumental fall. So sit back and listen closely. Once upon a time, in the bleak lands of France, a boy from a small island was born. Raised in the rugged mountains of Corsica, this young man chased one dream throughout his life: to build a grand empire. But not just any empire, one that would etch his name in golden letters into the pages of history, a civilization that would stand the test of time. From a tiny island, he rose to become one of Europe's most powerful leaders. His story began with a childhood dream, but was forged in blood, gunpowder, and conquest on the battlefield. The victories he envisioned and the empire he built would forever be associated with his name, but so would his great defeats and exiles. Tonight's story is about Napoleon's grand dream and how that dream turned into a legend. We will witness his victories, strategies, mistakes, and the inevitable downfall, each one a lesson in its own right. But most importantly, we'll feel that endless ambition, the unique fire that burned in his eyes. Yes, my friends, I have seen and heard much. I'm ready to tell you how Napoleon conquered the world step by step and became lost in an unforgettable dream. If you're ready, let's begin this magical journey. My dear friends, when we talk about Napoleon's story, we have to start from the very beginning, from the land where he was born and shaped. Because behind every great leader, there's a homeland that nurtured him and a childhood that inspired him. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15th, 1769, on the island of Corsica. Oh, that island. Known for its fierce winds, rocky landscapes, and deep forests, it's a place in the middle of the Mediterranean, shaped by the harsh hands of nature. But as tough as the land was, little Napoleon carried a huge dream in his heart. Corsica was where the seeds of Napoleon's ambition were first planted. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was an Italian noble, but when Napoleon was still very young, Corsica came under French rule. This event etched Napoleon's first major rebellion into his subconscious, a nation's struggle for sovereignty. He may have been just a child, but the French takeover of Corsica deeply affected him. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that as he wandered through the island's mountains, he dreamed of leading a great fight for his people's freedom. He was just a kid, but inside there was so much more conquest, ambition, and leadership. When Napoleon turned 10, his family decided to send him to military school. Despite his young age, the huge dreams he carried set him apart from the others. When he was sent to Brienne Military Academy in the shadow of Versailles, a whole new world opened up for him. But let's not forget, back then Napoleon struggled to speak French and was often ridiculed for it. Yes, friends, imagine young Napoleon speaking with a heavy accent, trying to find his place among the noble French kids. But these challenges only fueled his ambition and boosted his courage. Because from childhood, Napoleon had one thing: determination. At military school, he would read biographies of the most important military and political leaders of the time and study their strategies. Especially Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. He admired their victories on the battlefield and the grand futures they promised their people. These figures became living heroes in Napoleon's mind. One day he dreamed of following in their footsteps and making his own mark on history. This dream took such a strong hold on him that even as a young man, his teachers and peers sensed that there was a leader growing inside him. During this time at Brienne, he spent long hours studying, often alone. His talents in subjects like math and artillery were quickly noticed. To him, War wasn't just a battle of brute force. No, Napoleon understood at a very young age that war was both an art and a science. He learned to master strategy and tactics like an artist using colors on a canvas. But friends, what set Napoleon apart was that he wasn't just fighting battles in textbooks, but also in his imagination. Every lesson was a preparation one day. All of Europe's fate would be part of his grand plan. Of course, these years were critical in shaping his ideals. That boy from Corsica had to adapt to French high society. Along the way, he faced moments filled with disappointment and bullying. But he saw all these challenges as stepping stones. In Napoleon's eyes, to survive was to fight. It was the fundamental necessity of existence. Just like Corsica's mountains, he hardened, and like the fire of the French Revolution, his heart burned with ambition. So, dear friends, Napoleon's years in military school slowly paved the way for him to become a great commander. He started as just another student, but soon became known as a brilliant strategist. He knew that France and maybe all of Europe would need him one day. Even back then, the empire he dreamed of was crystal clear in his mind. This young man, who would go on to change the fate of both France and his people, had already taken the first necessary steps to becoming a phenomenal leader. Napoleon's childhood in Corsica and his experiences at military school were the foundation stones that carried him to the top. But remember, this was only the beginning. His real story would be written on the battlefield, on the imperial throne, and in exile. Ah, yes, friends. Let me take you back to the tumultuous days of the French Revolution. Those years weren't just about the upheaval in France, they were also a time when Europe's fate was being rewritten. And right in the middle of this period, young Napoleon Bonaparte stepped onto the stage of history. But his rise to fame wasn't a straightforward story. It was complex, tumultuous, and the result of a series of incredible events. The year was 1789. Across France, anger, hunger, and poverty had erupted. The people, having long surpassed their limits of patience, had revolted against the king's autocratic rule, the nobles living in luxury, and the church's oppression. Crowds shouting bread and the streets echoing with liberty, equality, fraternity were not just signs of a revolution that would change France but the entire world. Yes, this revolution would not only bring down the king but also mark the end of centuries of monarchies. Yet, amidst this chaos, one man was about to rise: Napoleon Bonaparte. At that time, young Napoleon was carefully watching these winds of change. The revolution wasn't just a popular uprising, it was an opportunity for him, because he knew that history creates new heroes during such massive shifts. Having completed his military training, as a young and ambitious officer, he was determined to find a path in this turmoil. As France's social structure was collapsing, new faces and leaders were being sought in both the military and political arenas. With the old order falling apart, doors were opening for young soldiers like Napoleon. And this door was about to open for Napoleon in Toulon. The Siege of Toulon. Friends, this was Napoleon's first major victory that changed his destiny. It was 1793, during one of the most intense periods of the French Revolution. While France was struggling with civil wars and foreign enemies, the port of Toulon had fallen into British hands. The city was of strategic importance. Losing Toulon would be a serious blow to France. At that time, Napoleon was serving as an artillery officer under General Dugommier in the siege. But remember, dear friends, Napoleon was never an ordinary soldier. He immediately showed his difference in Toulon. When the British took control of the city, Napoleon's eyes were fixed on that coastal city. He carefully examined the enemy's weak points and identified strategic locations. And at that moment we saw how a young officer mastered the art of war. Napoleon presented the plan needed for the Revolutionary Army to successfully complete the siege in Toulon. His strategy was simple, but equally brilliant set up a series of artillery positions to bombard the city and force the defending British and Spanish forces to retreat. Ah, friends, here we see Napoleon's military genius even at such a young age. His plan was executed so skillfully that the enemy forces were left helpless. His composure and determination during the siege caught the attention of his commanders. Toulon was quickly taken from the enemy, and Napoleon's name suddenly began to shine in the French Revolutionary Army. What happened in Toulon that day was not just the liberation of a city, but the beginning of Napoleon's victorious career. But beyond this victory, we witnessed Napoleon's rapid rise in military and political circles. The victory at Toulon opened the doors to general rank for him. Ah, yes, Napoleon quickly stood out in the chaotic post-revolution military and political environment with his sharp mind and military genius. He wasn't just a soldier who knew how to fight, but also a strategist who expertly used politics. He was aware of the social changes brought by the revolution and managed to establish himself as a leader in both the military and political arenas during this chaotic period. This revolutionary atmosphere was like a storm that shaped Napoleon. While the French Revolution was toppling the monarchy, it was also laying the foundations for an empire. And on those foundations, Napoleon's imperial dream was rising. But the victory at Toulon was just the beginning. He faced larger battles and greater victories ahead. However, the victory he achieved in Toulon laid a solid foundation for realizing his future imperial dreams. Dear friends, Napoleon's story shows us that he was not just a soldier but also a revolutionary. This young man who rose with the revolution would eventually lead France and even determine the fate of Europe. But we must remember that without his victory at Toulon, Napoleon's name might have faded into the dusty pages of history. Toulon was the first victory that wrote his name in golden letters in history. Ah, my friends, I will now take you back to Napoleon Bonaparte's first great command, the Italian campaign, where he proved himself as a young general. The dust of the battlefields, the smell of gunpowder, and the shouts of victory. Napoleon was perhaps one of the smartest and bravest commanders in history. But this campaign would open the door to an era that would launch not only his military genius, but also his political rise in Europe. It was 1796. France was in the midst of a revolutionary hurricane. The country was plagued by enemies from within and without. Italy was under the influence of the Austrian Empire and posed a constant threat to France's southern borders. Napoleon was a young general, only 26 years old, but his military acumen and revolutionary spirit had seen him rise rapidly. The French government at the time took a great risk by sending him to the Italian front. Because, friends, this army under Napoleon's command was tired, hungry, and demoralized. But this is where Napoleon would show his difference. When Napoleon took charge of his army, the first thing he did was to boost the morale of his soldiers. So much so that he promised his soldiers that with their future victories they would have rich lands and return with glory and fame. Napoleon's words were like a magic wand that instilled courage in the hearts of his soldiers. This young general was not only a warrior but also a leader. He gave his troops courage and hope and made them loyal to him. And then, the battles began in the rugged terrain of northern Italy. It was here that Napoleon's genius showed itself. He stunned his enemies by attacking them quickly, unexpectedly, and overwhelmingly. The Austrian army could not keep up with the speed and strategic acumen of this young French general. Napoleon, like a master on a chessboard, was mating his enemy on every move. In these narrow valleys and mountain roads of Italy, Napoleon's military power and strategic vision were at their peak. He won one victory after another. His bravery at the Lodi Bridge was legendary. Crossing the bridge under enemy fire, he encouraged his army and personally led the attack. This was not just crossing a bridge, it symbolized the beginning of Napoleon's victories. But friends, these victories were not limited to military successes. Napoleon's leadership during the Italian campaign also gave him the opportunity to rise in the political arena in Europe. The rich lands of Italy began to flow into France's treasury. Napoleon skillfully led his army not only on the battlefield but also at the political table. Each of his victories raised France's prestige and made his name known to the other great powers of Europe. Once an ordinary officer, Napoleon was now recognized as one of the most dangerous commanders in Europe. So, my friends, Napoleon's Italian campaign was not only a series of military victories, but also a major turning point that made him a power on the European stage. But the most important result of these victories came in 1797 with the Treaty of Campo Formio. This is very important, because this treaty showed that Napoleon was not only a commander, but also a diplomat. The Treaty of Campo Formio. Yes, this treaty officially started Napoleon's political rise in Europe. This treaty with Austria was the first major diplomatic success of the French Revolution. It gave France vast territories in northern Italy and weakened the influence of the Austrian Empire. Napoleon crowned his victories on the battlefield at the diplomatic table, giving France a great advantage. But remember, dear friends, Campo Formio was not just a peace treaty. It was a symbol of Napoleon's power in European politics. He was no longer just a general, but a statesman. The campaign he had started as a young commander had made him one of the most important figures in France. These victories and this treaty were the foundation stones of his future empire. It is very important to understand this point: Napoleon's diplomatic prowess, as much as his military genius, made him unique in history. And the Italian campaign was only the first step in this young man's rise in Europe. Greater victories and bigger dreams awaited him. But remember that the first spark of those dreams was lit in the rugged valleys of Italy, at the Bridge of Lodi, amid the astonished gaze of Austrian soldiers. It was here, in these lands, that the foundation of the victories that made Napoleon's name known throughout Europe was laid. Yes, my friends, Napoleon's first great command was crowned not only with military successes, but also with political maneuvers. His victories in Italy and the Treaty of Campo Formio were the first seeds of his dream of a future empire. Europe would hear the name of this young commander more often. My dear friends, I will now take you to one of Napoleon Bonaparte's most mysterious and adventurous expeditions, the Egyptian expedition, which was not only an adventure of Napoleon's pursuit of military success, but also a journey of scientific discovery. Yes, you heard that right. Napoleon went to Egypt not only with the sword, but also with the light of science. However, this journey was a turbulent period that brought both victories and heavy defeats. It was 1798. Napoleon had made a name for himself with his victories in Italy and had become a great hero in France. But this young commander also had a dream beyond the borders of Europe. With this expedition to Egypt, Napoleon did not just want to achieve a military victory. His ambitions were higher. Like the pharaohs, he wanted to be immortal and leave an indelible mark on history. He also wanted to weaken the British by cutting off their trade routes to India. This plan showed Napoleon's strategic intelligence as well as his military genius. But Napoleon's interest in Egypt was not only military and strategic. Friends, Napoleon was also an intellectual. His aim in this expedition was to uncover the ancient secrets of Egypt. He took with him not only soldiers but also scientists, engineers, historians, and archaeologists. This scientific expedition would work to illuminate the mysterious world of Egypt, to uncover the history of the Nile, the secrets of the pyramids, and the traces of ancient civilizations. Yes, friends, Napoleon's Egyptian expedition was not just a war, but a great voyage of discovery in the service of science. When they arrived in Egypt, Napoleon and his army stood in the shadow of thousands of years of history. Those gigantic pyramids, the land bearing the traces of ancient civilizations, further inflamed Napoleon's ambitions. But the real turning point of this campaign came with the great battle that went down in history as the Battle of the Pyramids. The Battle of the Pyramids. Yes, this is where Napoleon's military genius once again came to the fore. Napoleon led the French army against the Mamluk forces in Egypt. The Mamluks were a powerful warrior class that ruled the lands of Egypt. Their armies were led by thousands of mounted cavalry. But Napoleon was confident that with the most modern army in Europe, he could triumph over these ancient warriors. And so it was. This battle, fought in the shadow of the pyramids, was in a sense a clash of old and new. The Mamluks' brave mounted troops were no match for Napoleon's disciplined and modern tactics. Napoleon arranged his army in a square formation, creating a perfect line of defense against the cavalry. Although the Mamluks attacked repeatedly, they could not break through this square formation, and in the end, Napoleon won a great victory. It was at this point that Napoleon's famous words after the battle were engraved in history: soldiers, 40 centuries are watching you at the top of the pyramids. This victory once again announced Napoleon's military genius to the whole world. However, my friends, Napoleon's adventure in Egypt did not end here. After this great victory, Napoleon, who wanted to consolidate France's power in the Mediterranean, also enabled scientists to try to unravel the ancient secrets of Egypt. Research among Egyptian ruins led to major discoveries such as the Rosetta Stone. This stone allowed the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs and made a major contribution to world history. Here Napoleon was leaving a great legacy to humanity by taking the light of science with him as well as on the battlefield. However, as fate would have it, Napoleon's great campaign, though it began with triumphs, would end in a dark defeat. The situation in the Mediterranean was becoming increasingly complicated. Admiral Horatio Nelson, the legendary commander of the British fleet, was on Napoleon's trail. And here, friends, in the middle of the sea, one of the greatest naval battles in history took place, the Battle of the Nile. While Napoleon was in Egypt, the French fleet faced Nelson's forces in the waters of the Mediterranean Sea. The French Navy had high hopes of winning this battle, but with an incredible strategy, Admiral Nelson inflicted a heavy defeat on the French fleet. As French ships burned in the waters of the Nile, Napoleon was trapped in Egypt. This defeat severely weakened Napoleon's military presence in Egypt and threatened his European ambitions. But Napoleon was not one to be shaken by defeat. Realizing that he could no longer hold on in Egypt, Napoleon devised a clever plan to get out of this difficult situation. He left his army in Egypt and secretly returned to France. This return marked the beginning of a chain of events that would lead to Napoleon's rapid rise and further consolidation of power in France. Yes, friends, Napoleon had suffered heavy defeats as well as great victories. But from each defeat, like a phoenix, he managed to rise from the ashes. Such was the story of Napoleon's Egyptian campaign. His victories in the shadow of the pyramids, his defeats in the dark waters of the Nile, and his eventual return to France. The campaign would be remembered in Napoleon's life as both a scientific triumph and a military tragedy. But in any case, this adventure, which etched Napoleon's name in history, laid the foundations for his dreams of a great empire in the years to come. Dear friends, this story of Napoleon shows us this defeats as much as victories shape the greatness of a leader. As the waves of the French Revolution shook all of Europe, the internal chaos was plunging France into a future of uncertain turmoil. After the Revolution of 1789, the country had fallen into a constant power vacuum, with governments coming and going, and the people suffering from unrest and poverty. Amidst this chaos, a young and ambitious general named Napoleon Bonaparte made his move on the 18th of Brumaire, November 9th. 1799, an action that would change the course of French history. This event, known as the Brumaire coup, would not only determine Napoleon's fate but also set the direction for modern Europe. Napoleon was already a hero in the eyes of the French people due to his military successes. But he wasn't content to remain just a soldier. He saw the political turmoil and the weaknesses of the newly established governments as an opportunity and prepared his plan to seize power completely. The Directory, the ruling body at the time, had lost the public's trust, and economic troubles and political strife had brought the country to the brink of another revolution. Napoleon viewed this weakness and chaos as an opportunity. The Brumaire coup was a strategic move designed to completely dismantle this frail structure. On the tense day of the coup, Paris was filled with curiosity and unease. With the support of his brother Lucien Bonaparte, Napoleon gathered part of the legislature around him. It was like a scene from a play. Napoleon emerged not just as a military genius but as a political actor. The swiftly organized coup would overthrow the Directory and pave the way for Napoleon. At this point, Napoleon's brilliance was not only in maintaining discipline within the army, but also in winning public support. With the Brumaire coup, he moved to incapacitate the assemblies and set up a new government system. The result? The end of one era and the dawn of another. With this move, Napoleon demonstrated not only his military power but also his political skill. After the coup, Napoleon positioned himself as France's new leader and took the title of consul. Choosing this title was a sign of his future absolute rule. But this was more than just a change in titles under Napoleon's leadership. A series of reforms would transform France and all of Europe. From the very first days of taking over France, Napoleon acted not just as a ruler but as a savior. The country was riddled with deep-seated issues: economic troubles, unjust legal systems, and a fragmented political structure. Napoleon was determined to fix this chaos. His initial actions included making significant reforms to improve the daily lives of the French people and make the government more efficient. The education system was restructured, military discipline was established, and most importantly, major changes were made in legal regulations. The most notable of these reforms was the Napoleonic Code, or Code Napoleon, considered one of Napoleon's greatest achievements. This legal system was one of the most profound legal reforms in France's history. At the time, France's legal system was complex and unjust, with local courts and laws being applied in a disjointed manner. Napoleon aimed to create a legal system where everyone could find justice equally. The Napoleonic Code was a revolution that laid the foundations for modern legal systems. This code introduced sweeping changes in many areas, from property rights to commercial agreements, marriage to criminal law. The most important principle was the equal application of laws to all citizens. Many privileges that were previously reserved for the nobility came to an end with the Napoleonic Code. This was a turning point not just for France but for the rest of Europe as well. With Napoleon's conquests, these laws began to be implemented in many countries, and thus Napoleon permanently changed the legal system not only in France but across Europe. The Napoleonic Code continued to influence legal systems throughout the 19th century and beyond as a system that emphasized individual rights and legal reform. With these laws, Napoleon had moved beyond being seen just as a military hero and established himself as a statesman working to create a fair and orderly society. The reform movement that began in France strengthened Napoleon's political power and reshaped his leadership from a military dictatorship to a reformist ruler. Thus, Napoleon crowned his political journey, which began with the Brumaire coup, as the most powerful figure in France, starting to rebuild the nation with legal and social reforms. But this was just the beginning. The chaotic years of the French Revolution left behind neither a broken monarchy nor a stable republic. The people, weary from years of revolutionary conflicts and political turmoil, were craving trust, power, and leadership. At this point, a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte emerged, not just as a soldier but as a candidate to build a new empire. But this journey was not an easy one. With his military successes and political genius, Napoleon unified France and eventually declared himself Emperor of the French, setting the stage for a major transformation in the heart of Europe. On that cold December morning in 1804, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris was preparing for a grand ceremony. For the first time in French history, a popular figure was getting ready to wear the imperial crown, not to restore a sacred monarchy, but with the support of a revolutionary people. Napoleon's move, which upended traditions and norms, would bring him a mixture of deep admiration and fear, both within France and among Europe's monarchies. However, Napoleon wasn't going to sit on the throne like a king. He would be an emperor who shattered traditions and shaped his own destiny. As the ceremony began, all eyes were on Napoleon. Pope Pius VII was there to bless Napoleon and place the imperial crown on his head. But then, an event happened that changed the course of history. Just as the Pope was about to place the crown on Napoleon, Napoleon made a move no one expected. He took the crown into his own hands and placed it on his head. This act was more than just a symbolic gesture. It was a clear declaration that Napoleon derived his power not from any external authority like God or the Church, but entirely from his own abilities. For him, becoming emperor was not just a title but a symbol of dominance that would be etched into world history. That moment marked the beginning of a new era, one that would radically alter not just France, but Europe's political landscape. With Napoleon's crowning as emperor, European monarchies were plunged into deep anxiety. Napoleon was not only aiming to control France, but also the entire continent. The balance of power in Europe was suddenly upended. Monarchs began to see Napoleon's rise not just as a threat to their own thrones, but as the collapse of a centuries-old monarchical order. Napoleon's goal was not just to be a French emperor. He planned to establish a new imperial order in Europe, one that would rule with a power capable of bringing kingdoms to their knees. As nobles and kings across Europe feared Napoleon's enormous influence, Napoleon confidently continued his conquests. Developing a series of reforms and military strategies to consolidate his authority, Napoleon increased his power by winning the love and loyalty of his people. Not just in France, but in the lands he conquered, he began to be seen not as a mere emperor, but almost as a savior of the people. While Napoleon challenged the kingdoms across Europe, he managed to win over public support. As kings fought to preserve their traditional power, Napoleon was shaking their thrones with his revolutionary spirit and military genius. From the moment Napoleon took the throne, he began changing the fate of Europe. One of his first steps was to strengthen his imperial crown by combining political and military strategies to increase pressure on the kingdoms. Powerful European states like Austria, Prussia, and Russia began to worry about Napoleon's conquests and reforms. Each of them formed coalitions and alliances to stop Napoleon's rapidly spreading power. However, as a great strategist, Napoleon won victories on every front, disrupting the balance of power among the kings. His military successes and diplomatic maneuvers completely altered the balance of power in Europe. Despite the coalitions formed against him, Napoleon achieved countless victories in the heart of Europe and its borders. Austerlitz, Jena, Friedland. These victories were not just proof of military superiority, but also of Napoleon's political genius. Each battle he won gave him more control over new territories and kingdoms. During this process, by implementing the Napoleonic codes in the conquered territories, he was not only achieving political and military victories, but also bringing about social and legal transformations. Napoleon wasn't just establishing his authority everywhere he went, he was also spreading revolutionary spirit and ideals of equality. But Napoleon's process of strengthening his authority was not limited to military victories. He was also building a new imperial order within France. Through reforms in education, law, trade, and social life, he solidified the imperial administration. Napoleon was not just a military genius but also a modern statesman. As he strengthened his authority, the trust and affection of the people towards him grew. Napoleon, who shook the thrones of kings, had become not just an emperor but a savior in the hearts of the people. Napoleon's influence over Europe extended beyond military and political realms to cultural and social areas as well. Under his rule, there were significant advancements in art, science, and education. France experienced a cultural and intellectual revival under Napoleon's leadership. However, for the other European monarchies, this also meant a threat. Kings realized that Napoleon was not only seizing their lands but also the minds of their people. Napoleon's revolutionary spirit was weakening the authority of monarchies in the eyes of the people. In the end, with Napoleon's crowning as emperor, not just France but all of Europe entered a new era. Napoleon did not just declare himself an emperor but also upended the old world order and increased the pressure on monarchies. He became not only a military leader but also a genius who shaped modern Europe. Every victory, every reform, and every move of his rewrote Europe's future. A storm was brewing in the heart of Europe. As the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte upset the balance of the continent, the old monarchies in Europe felt under great threat. Napoleon's wearing the imperial crown and carrying out radical reforms in the administration by keeping the revolutionary spirit alive in France attracted the attention of powerful states such as Austria, England, and Russia. These powers, who wanted to restrain Napoleon's power and preserve order in Europe, formed the Third Coalition and formed a grand alliance against Napoleon. The aim of this coalition was to put an end to Napoleon's rise in Europe and prevent revolutionary waves from sweeping the continent. Austria and Russia, with the support of Britain, mobilized to ignite the fuse of this great war. The coalition realized that if Napoleon was not stopped at once, the continent's monarchies would collapse one by one. This was not just a military struggle. This was a grand showdown between Napoleon's revolutionary vision and the entrenched order of the old world. By 1805, the great war that would decide the fate of Europe was drawing ever closer. Under Napoleon's genius, the armies of France were in perfect preparation. Napoleon knew very well who his enemies were. He had meticulously planned his military strategy against the powerful armies of Austria and the warriors trained in the vast territories of Russia. But Napoleon's greatest strength was not only the physical superiority of his troops, but also his superb military intelligence. The most important turning point in this gigantic conflict was the Battle of Austerlitz, the Battle of the Three Emperors, which took place on December 2, 1805. This battle would be recognized as the culmination of Napoleon's war strategy and leadership skills. On the battlefield, Emperor Napoleon of France was opposed by the Russian Tsar Alexander I and Emperor Franz I of Austria. The armies of the three great emperors would face each other at Austerlitz. However, Napoleon did not see this war as an ordinary battle. He planned it as a struggle that would change the fate of Europe. On the morning of the battle, the plains of Austerlitz were shrouded in fog. This day of low visibility was an advantage for Napoleon. He was a strategist who knew how to use even nature as a weapon. Napoleon positioned his army as if he underestimated the strength of the Austrian and Russian troops. He even devised a grand plan to lure his enemies into a trap by deliberately making the center of his army look weak. Napoleon's feigned weakness fooled his enemies. The Austrian and Russian commanders saw this as a great opportunity for victory and went on the offensive. But Napoleon was able to anticipate every move of his enemies. As the Austrian and Russian troops advanced towards the center of the French army, Napoleon mobilized the flanks of his army with great agility. While the enemy armies were trapped in the center, the French troops advanced rapidly from the flanks and besieged them. At that moment, a military genius that will go down in history was born. Napoleon guided the huge coalition armies, trying to stop him as if he were moving on a chessboard, defeating them with every move. The Battle of Austerlitz ended in complete victory thanks to Napoleon's perfect military planning and strategic genius. The Russian and Austrian troops suffered a heavy defeat. This was not just a victory, but the beginning of Napoleon's hegemony over Europe. This victory over the colossal forces of the coalition established Napoleon not only as a military leader, but also as an emperor who determined the fate of Europe. This victory not only consolidated Napoleon's imperial crown, but also shook the thrones of the kingdoms of Europe. This great victory over Austria and Russia consolidated Napoleon's dominance over Europe. No power in Europe was now strong enough to stand against Napoleon.